The morning after I gave birth, my mother wouldn't even look at my son. She stood at the foot of my hospital bed with her arms crossed and said, "That fatherless baby will never be part of this family." My father didn't waste a second. He pulled a folder from his briefcase, set it on my blanket right next to my newborn, and told me to sign away my 12% of the family estate or raise my son alone with nothing. He'd chosen that exact moment on purpose. He knew I was exhausted, still sore, still emotionally raw, and he was counting on that to make me weak enough to sign before I left the hospital. I looked down at my baby's face, still soft from sleep, and I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just held him tighter and said, "Okay." They thought that meant I was giving up. They had no idea that weeks earlier, while helping sort through my late grandfather's study, I had already found something that would destroy the lies holding their entire family fortune together. My name is Vivian Marsh, and 11 months ago, my whole world had already been rearranged once. The day my son's father, Tobias, was killed in a highway accident 4 months before our baby was born. I was 26 years old, 6 months pregnant, and suddenly alone. My parents, Harold and Diane Marsh, had never approved of Tobias in the first place. He wasn't from the right circles. He didn't come from money. When he died, I heard my mother mutter to my sister that it was almost a relief, honestly, before things got more complicated. I never forgot that sentence. My family owned Marsh Timber Holdings, a logging and land management company my grandfather built from nothing in the 1960s. By the time I was born, it was worth roughly $40 million, spread across land assets, mill operations, and investment accounts. I was the middle child. My older sister, Kimberly, was the golden one. Married well, worked in the family business, always agreeing with our father. My younger brother, Preston, was the baby everyone protected. I was the one who asked questions, who didn't perform gratitude the way they wanted, who they never quite trusted. My grandfather, Elias Marsh, was different from the rest of them. He used to take me on walks through the timber lots when I was a little girl, teaching me the names of trees, telling me stories about building the company with his own hands. Before he passed away when I was 22, he pulled me aside one afternoon and said something strange. He said, "Vivian, when the time comes, don't let your father convince you that you don't deserve your share. You watch, and you remember what's fair." I didn't understand what he meant then. I understood it fully 3 weeks before I gave birth. That was when my mother asked me to help box up some of my grandfather's old study for storage, since no one else had gotten around to it in the 2 years since he passed. Buried in a filing drawer beneath old business ledgers, I found a folder marked Estate, Original. Inside was a copy of my grandfather's original will, dated 4 years before he died. It stated clearly that his 3 grandchildren, myself, Kimberly, and Preston, would each receive an equal 12% stake in Marsh Timber Holdings upon his passing, with the remaining shares split among surviving children and a conservation trust. 12%. That number stuck with me because it matched exactly what my father claimed was generously being offered to me now, as if it were a gift he could revoke. But there was a second document behind it. A later amendment, dated only 8 months before my grandfather's death, supposedly signed by him, reducing my share from 12% down to 2%, with the difference reallocated directly to my father's control. The signature on that amendment didn't look right to me. My grandfather had a very distinctive, shaky signature in his final year because of a tremor in his hand. This signature was smooth. Too smooth. I didn't say anything. I photographed both documents on my phone and put everything back exactly where I found it. Then I went home and I waited. 3 weeks later, I gave birth to my son, Julian, in a hospital just outside the city. My mother arrived 20 minutes after he was born, looked at him for exactly 4 seconds, and said the words I will never forget. My father arrived an hour later with a leather folder of his own, different from the one in the study, but just as calculated. Inside were new documents. A full release form, waiving my rights to any future inheritance claim, in exchange for what he called continued financial support for Julian's early years. He explained it like he was doing me a favor. He said a single mother with no ties to the family business would be simpler for everyone. Simpler for him, he meant. I remember looking at my father's hands as he held that pen out to me. Steady. Confident. The same hands, I now believed, that had guided someone else's pen across a forged signature line years earlier. I took the pen. I looked at the document. And I said the only thing that made sense in that moment. I need a few days to think about this while I recover. You wouldn't want people saying you pressured a woman 2 hours after labor, would you? My father's jaw tightened, but he nodded, because appearances mattered more to him than almost anything else. He left the folder on the tray table and walked out without saying goodbye to his grandson. The moment they left, I called the one person I trusted completely outside my family, my grandfather's former estate attorney, a sharp, quiet man named Nathaniel Reyes, who had retired from the firm my father now used but still kept his own small practice 2 towns over. I sent him photos of both documents from my hospital bed, my newborn sleeping against my chest, and asked him one question: "Is this amendment real?" Nathaniel called me back 2 days later, his voice low and careful. He told me he'd gone back through his archived files before calling, and that his records showed no amendment reducing my share had ever been drafted or witnessed by his office. He said if the signature matched what I described, and if there was no notarization matching my grandfather's actual notary from that period, there was a strong chance the amendment had been fabricated after his death, backdated to appear legitimate. He told me something else, something that made my stomach drop. He still had the original notarized will on file in his archived records, sealed under my grandfather's name, because my grandfather had specifically asked him years ago to keep a copy outside the family's control, just in case. I stayed calm. I didn't call my father screaming. I didn't post anything online. I did exactly what my grandfather taught me to do on those timber walks. I watched, and I gathered what I needed quietly, one step at a time. Over the following months, while recovering from birth and caring for Julian through sleepless nights, I worked with Nathaniel to build a formal case. He pulled banking records tied to the estate transfer that occurred after my grandfather's death, and what we found was worse than a simple inheritance dispute. The reallocated 10% that had been stripped from my share hadn't stayed in a family trust at all. It had been quietly transferred into a subsidiary account controlled almost entirely by my father, then used over the following years to cover mounting debts from a failed land development project he had never told the rest of the family about. My father had bet a significant portion of company assets on a resort development that collapsed, and rather than admit the loss to the board or to his own children, he had used my inheritance share, forged after my grandfather's death, to quietly patch the hole. My mother's insistence that I sign away my rights for the good of the family wasn't really about family unity at all. It was about making sure I never asked to see where that money had actually gone. While all of this was happening, my sister Kimberly started calling me, gentler than usual, dropping by with hand-me-down baby items and soft comments about how Dad just wants what's best, and how signing quickly would make things easier for everyone. I let her talk. I nodded along. I never told her what I had found, because I didn't yet know if she was involved or simply being used the way I once had been. It turned out to be the second one, but I didn't know that yet. Over the following year, Nathaniel and I built the full case, piece by piece. He located the original sealed will, obtained a forensic handwriting analysis comparing the disputed amendment signature to verified samples of my grandfather's actual signature, and confirmed there was no matching notary record anywhere in the county archives for that supposed signing date. Combined with the financial transfer trail and a sworn statement from Nathaniel about the original will he'd kept on file, we had 4 separate pillars supporting the claim, not just one. The handwriting alone might have raised questions. All 4 together left almost no room for doubt. I didn't confront my father over the phone. Once Julian was old enough that I felt steady on my feet again, I invited my parents to my apartment for what I called a conversation about the paperwork, and I asked Nathaniel to be present, introduced simply as a family friend helping me understand my options. My father walked in already looking pleased with himself, clearly expecting me to finally sign. My mother sat down without acknowledging Julian at all, which by that point didn't sting the way it once had. I let my father talk first. He explained again how signing would be best for everyone, how a young single mother shouldn't be burdened with complicated business matters. When he finished, I slid a folder across the table to him. Inside was a copy of the original will, the forensic signature analysis, the missing notary records, and a summary of the financial transfers Nathaniel had traced. I watched the color drain from his face as he read it. My mother grabbed the papers from his hands, scanning them with growing panic. "This is a private family matter," my father said, his voice suddenly much less steady than it had been moments ago. "It was," I said quietly, still holding Julian in my arms, "until you tried to make my newborn son pay for a mistake you made years before he was even born." I explained that Nathaniel wasn't simply a family friend. He was my legal representative, and he had already prepared a formal petition to the probate court to review the estate amendment, along with a report to the state bar regarding the notary seal that had apparently been used without proper witnessing. I told them I wasn't asking for anything beyond what my grandfather had already decided was mine. 12%. Not more. Just what was fair, exactly as he told me on those timber walks so many years ago. My father tried threats first, warning that a legal battle would destroy the company's reputation. I told him calmly that was entirely his choice. If he cooperated with restoring the original will through proper channels, this could stay a quiet internal correction. If he fought it, everything would become a matter of public record. He fought it anyway. For close to a year, my father tried to delay, intimidate, and discredit the claim, hiring an aggressive attorney of his own to argue the amendment was legitimate. But forensic evidence doesn't bend to pressure the way family members sometimes do. When the case finally reached a probate hearing, the judge reviewed the handwriting analysis, the absent notary records, the financial transfer documentation, and Nathaniel's sworn testimony about the sealed original he had kept on file for exactly this reason. The ruling was clear. The amendment was invalid. My original 12% stake was restored in full, along with a court-ordered disclosure requiring my father to account for how the reallocated funds had been used. That disclosure was what truly ended things. Once the misused funds tied to the failed resort project became part of the official record, an independent audit was ordered into the company's finances. The audit confirmed my father had used company-linked assets, including my forged inheritance share, to privately cover his failed investment without board knowledge. When the remaining shareholders, including two of my grandfather's surviving business partners, saw the full audit results, they called a formal vote. My father was removed from his position as majority operating partner, and an outside management team was brought in while ownership was restructured to honor the original will exactly as my grandfather intended. My mother never apologized. Not once. But something shifted in her after the ruling, something quieter than remorse but not entirely indifference either. Several months after the hearing, she showed up at my apartment alone, without calling first. She stood in my doorway for a long moment before asking if she could see Julian. I let her in, mostly because I didn't want my son growing up thinking his grandmother's cruelty was something he had caused. She held him stiffly at first, like she wasn't sure her hands remembered how, but she stayed for almost an hour. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a beginning, maybe, or maybe just an ending to the coldest part of things. My sister Kimberly, once she understood the full truth about where the money had actually gone, distanced herself from our father entirely for a while, though she and I are still slowly rebuilding what our relationship could look like now. My father still calls occasionally, always brief, always careful, like a man who knows he's speaking to someone who no longer needs anything from him. Julian is almost 1 year old now. He has his father's easy smile and, according to Nathaniel, something of my grandfather's steady, watching eyes. I use my restored share of the company to fund a small scholarship in my grandfather's name for kids from working families who want to study forestry and land management, the way he once dreamed young people might. I think about that morning in the hospital sometimes, my mother's voice cold above me, my father's pen waiting on the tray table. I think about how close I came to believing that 12% and my son's place in that family were things I had to beg for. They weren't. They were already mine. I just had to be patient enough, and quiet enough to prove it. If your own family ever tried to convince you that you didn't deserve what was rightfully yours, how long would you wait before you fought back? If this story moved you, hit subscribe to Sophie Revenge. We post a brand new story just like this one every single day.